For the last 10 years, the United Nations has named it the worst country in the world. And we'll find out why as we talk with two people tonight who have dedicated themselves to showing the love of Jesus Christ to the people of this tormented land. So, please stay with us. Thank you very much. I'm Father Mitch Pacwa, and welcome to EWTN Live, our chance to bring you folks from all over the world to be guests and talk about the great work that they're doing. Before we get to tonight's guests, I want to mention that today is the feast of St. Francis Borgia of the Society of Jesus. He was an interesting character. Some of you have probably heard of the Borgia popes. And probably the worst pope in our Catholic history was Rodrigo Borgia, who became Alexander VI. And he had 3 children, and one of them went over to Spain and was the grandfather of Francis Borgia. And it's pretty neat to see how one part of the family really wasn't so good. I mean, his great-great-aunt was Lucretia Borgia, and her poisoning brother Cesare. Rough family. But he grew up as a very good man. He was a good ruler. He was the viceroy of Spain and did a good job, lived out his Catholic life in a good way, had a wife and 8 children. But he really saw the futility of life when he had to accompany the body of Queen Isabella to her grave. And before he put her in it, he had to reopen the casket. And he saw how her beauty had so decayed. And he said, what is really the purpose of life? Someone he knew for so long that was so beautiful, had so many wonderful, rich clothes, and there she smelled so bad. Everybody else had to leave the place. He just was fixated. And that started his conversion. He made the spiritual exercises under some Jesuits. And he, after his wife died, he entered the society and eventually became one of our Fathers General and led the society very well. So, great saint for us to think about. Now, for tonight's guests, they have been practicing the corporal works of mercy toward individuals and families in the war-torn West African country of Sierra Leone, where many people see no hope and life literally hangs in the balance every day. To tell us more about this situation and how they're trying to improve it, please welcome the President and Executive Director of the Healy International Relief Foundation, Mr. Bob Healy Jr., and Monsignor Daniel Sullivan. Monsignor Sullivan, well, be here. Bob, good to meet you.
Yes.
Good to meet you. Welcome. Where do y'all live?
We are based in New Jersey.
New Jersey.
The foundation is in Jersey, but we travel all over the place.
Yeah, and Sierra Leone is not exactly real close to New Jersey, and that's it's a long trip.
It's about a 16-hour flight in total.
Yeah,
it's a god-awful trip.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Yes,
I'll bet.
Yes.
I've never seen any commercials pushing Sierra Leone Airlines, so.
No, there's a British Airway and a French airline.
There you go.
That's about it.
Now, a lot of folks don't know much of the background. There's this awful situation of a country that's, as the UN says, is the worst country in the world right now. I'd like to get some background, and maybe I'll start with you, Bob.
Sure.
Just give us a brief history of Sierra Leone.
Well, Sierra Leone was a stopover originally for Portuguese slavers. That's where it got its name, Sierra Leone. It's a Portuguese name. But interestingly enough, wasn't actually westernized, so to speak, until about 1787. The British government sent a lot of ex-slaves who had fought in the American Revolution over to Sierra Leone.
Now, these were American ex-slaves,
yes,
who fought on the British side.
Correct.
And they took them over there.
They took them over there after the war, along with some other freedmen from Britain and their colonies. And they founded Freetown, which is now the capital of Sierra Leone and was the capital. Interestingly enough, though, you know, this wasn't a depopulated country. There were tribes of Africans living there throughout history. And what you ended up getting was a population of westernized Africans who founded Freetown, next door to the native Africans, which
sort of living still in the tribal society.
Correct. And it went on for many years to create a very awkward situation whereby you had, I don't know any other way to put it, but maybe a little bit of racism within, you know, their own race almost.
Well, in the sense because, you know, the Africans who'd been moved back there weren't necessarily from there.
No.
And so they're put into that situation where there already are local people. What are some of the local tribal names?
The Mende is one of the largest tribes in Sierra Leone. They're the predominant one. There are several other smaller ones in the eastern and southern parts of Sierra Leone as well.
Okay. So that was the situation historically, and tension existed until modern times.
Some tension. The colony was a British colony until the 1950s. It peacefully separated from Britain after World War II. They had democratic elections, and it really became one of the jewels of the African countries in the 1950s and the 1960s. Dan, I mean, you can just tell them about the hospital. And
I think one of the things that really helped Sierra Leone even bridge the gap tribally was the fact that in the late 1700s, early 1800s, they sent African missionaries down there, the Holy Ghost Fathers, the Holy Rosary Sisters. Now, these sisters and priests are true heroes in my eyes, because they went into literally the bush country. And they took a country that was uneducated, basically a country that was disorganized, and through the Catholic network established schools and orphanages and clinics and hospitals, and took that infrastructure and made Sierra Leone, before the Civil War of 1991, one of the most educated countries in Africa. Today, it's back in the Dark Ages.
Yeah. See, this, and just briefly, what happened with the Civil War? Why was there a Civil War?
Well, in roughly around 1991, Liberia had been having its own civil war, which was the country next door. Many people are familiar with Charles Taylor. He was just tried in The Hague, as a matter of fact, and sentenced. That civil war in Liberia really spilled over into Sierra Leone. A lot of those mercenaries were Sierra Leonean fighting in Liberia. They then came back to Sierra Leone and took over the diamond mines in the western part of Sierra Leone. Those diamonds they then used to fund their army, which they created, called the Revolutionary United Front, the RUF, which had no major political or sociological or even religious thrust. Really what it boiled down to was people who were not in power were unhappy and wanted to be in power. There were some claims of corruption within the government. No civil war is simple. Right. The RUF eventually managed to take Freetown. They rolled through the entire country, and theirs was a war of destruction, absolute destruction.
Yeah, there are a number of movies that have been done about that horrible war. Absolutely incredible cruelty and destruction.
If you see Blood Diamond with Leonardo DiCaprio, we always tell people, watch the first 15 minutes. It's a great story. It's a good movie, and a lot of it is very, very true. But the first 15 minutes, where RUF rebels roll into a town, take all the young men, capture the young women, put them on a truck, take all of the young men, and they ask them very simply, long sleeve or short sleeve. It's a very true thing that happened. The government at the time was trying to have free elections, and so their slogan was, "The future is in your hands." Well, what the rebels decided was, if you don't have hands, you can't vote. So they would put their hand usually their right hand, onto a block, and they would ask them, long sleeve or short sleeve. If they'd answered long sleeve, they cut their hand off here. And short sleeve, they would cut their hand off here, their arm off here.
And we're not talking about 100 years ago.
Yeah, this war ended in
2004.
Yeah.
When the UN peacekeeping troops left. And what I think people have to know is that the RUF rebels, after they would capture a town, they went on a purposeful effort to eradicate the Catholic presence from Sierra Leone, which had been there 200 years. Mm-hmm. They expelled all the foreign-born priests and religious. They burned churches. Sometimes they made the priests themselves burn the church after they looted them. They would kidnap young girls to make them camp prostitutes. They would take young boys to make them children soldiers. They destroyed
and oftentimes giving them drugs to keep them, psyched up for fights.
Absolutely.
One of their tactics, their main tactic, was to kidnap a group of boys. They would give them what they call brown. It's a combination of cocaine and gunpowder. Gets them very hopped up, let you march extensive miles during the day, and then at night they would give them some form of heroin, which would then calm them down and put them to sleep. But not only that, it makes you dependent upon the army. Sure. They would then send those boys back in to their home villages after they had trained them and brainwashed them, and would have them destroy the village and kill anybody that was left, because then you have no place else to go but the army.
Right.
And I think, too, that what you have to realize is that they tried as best they could to eradicate the Catholic Church. You can burn a church, you can destroy a convent, you can destroy a rectory, a clinic, a hospital, an orphanage. The people are the living stones of the church.
Right.
And in doing so, you cannot break the backs of the people just by ruining a building. So the faith lived on. Stories of priests who had to escape with their lives living in the bush, who had Muslim brothers and sisters who would sneak into town, buy a loaf of bread, bring it out so they could celebrate Mass in the bush. Now, the RUF rebels didn't do this because of anti-Catholicism. I have to make that point very, very clear.
It wasn't a religious war.
No, not at all. I mean, why they did it is they knew that the Catholic infrastructure was so strong that if they broke that, you would break the backs of the people. Yep. So a purposeful, what I call path of evil and destruction.
And by causing that kind of chaos, they want to recreate their own culture, like
Absolutely.
A lot of anarchists do wherever they are.
Absolutely.
Now, one of the things I want to make sure that we get to, because this gives us the situation, what are you doing over there?
We are working very closely with the Archbishop. We've worked with the former Archbishop, and now we're working with the present Archbishop. What happened after the war in 2004 was the government looked around and said, we have our hands full. We have to rebuild the roads, the infrastructure. There's still only 4 hours of electricity a day in Sierra Leone. Everything else we can't handle. So they said to the Archbishop, here, you handle the schools, you handle the hospitals, you handle the orphanages, you handle the clinics, and you also see what other needs are out there, which are some of the marvelous heart-tugging programs that Archbishop Ganda and now Archbishop Charles have put into place. So we're doing a lot. We do whatever we can to help build up hearts, minds, and souls. And to me, who's been a priest for over 35 years, it's been a true journey of love. And I used to think that serving the poor was just following a mandate of Jesus. It's a privilege to serve the poor. Yeah. And we can't say them and us. It's us. We are one bread, one body, one family. And when we live that, then we understand the true message of Jesus.
Yeah.
Some of the programs, if you want me to get into
Yeah, I'd
those
like
right
to
now.
get into some of the concrete things,
Yes.
because the needs that you have there are very distinctive
Exactly.
of that formerly war-torn place.
Let me tell you a few needs that are near and dear to my heart and near and dear to the Foundation's heart. First one is Fatima House of Light. During the war, young girls were kidnapped. Now again, you got to keep in mind that we're not talking 100 years ago. They were kidnapped between the ages of 6 and 16, brought back to the rebel villages, drugged out of their minds, and they were made to be camp prostitutes, 6 years old to 16.
They called them camp wives.
Camp
Camp
wives.
wives.
When another group of girls were kidnapped, they didn't need the former girls. So they would take them out in front of all the rebels, build a big campfire. They'd cut off their left hand, their right hand, their left foot. They'd cut off both their breasts. Then they would castrate them with a hot poker from the campfire. They'd then take these girls and dump them back into their villages. But according to African culture, their families wouldn't accept them. They were damaged goods. They'd never be married. So,
Well, as a matter of fact, with the damage that they did to them, they couldn't nurse.
absolutely.
It would be very difficult for them to conceive even,
Exactly.
perhaps.
So what did they do? They went into Freetown and became maimed streetwalkers. Now, the former archbishop saw this, and it was a great need. He used to be right outside his window. He'd see these girls walking around, some of them still bleeding from the cuts, because when you cut the hand off, the bone still grows. And seeing this...
Especially in a young girl.
Especially on a young girl. So he literally went out there and would take them, brought them back, and found Fatima House of Light. Now, he calls it Fatima House of Light because he doesn't turn the lights off. When he turns the lights off, the girls scream out in terror. What he's done and what we're doing as the Healy International Relief Foundation is to support them. We're training these girls to be secretaries. We're training them to be cooks. We're training them to be nurses' aides. And one of the newest things, believe it or not, we're training them to be auto mechanics, which is a growing, booming business in Sierra Leone. Now, we had to go out and find manual typewriters, because don't forget, 4 hours of electricity.
So we need the old-time manual.
You need the old-time. I mean, we found a lot of people willing to give them away, and then we finally found a company that said, here, we're glad you want them. Here they are. So once they graduate from there, and none have yet graduated, because there's a lot of healing that has to happen.
I mean, they're brutalized.
They are...
Brutalized.
They need a sense of empowerment. They need a sense of worthiness. They need a sense of, I am as loved by God as everyone else, even though I don't have a hand, I don't have breasts, I don't have a foot. And what is most important is to give these girls a sense of purpose. And so we train them, and then if they are training to be a secretary and they graduate, they keep their typewriter. Because why send them out?
Sure.
Without a typewriter.
They need something like that.
So that's probably one of my favorite things. I remember Sister Jane Alpha, who used to run it, very short little sister that was tough as nails, right? And I said to her once, Sister Jane, what do you need? And I thought she was going to say sewing machines or typewriters or anything like that. She said to me, Monsignor Dan, she said, I need 9,000 teddy bears. I thought to myself, 9,000 teddy bears? You had about 300 girls in the school. I thought, well, I said, Sister, just tell me why you need 9,000 teddy bears. She said, every night they give a girl one of the teddy bears. And by morning, that teddy bear is ripped to shreds because of the night terrors they go through. These girls are still girls. And these girls need our prayers, our help, our love, and our support. The other thing I think needs to be mentioned is St. Stephen's Home for Amputees. As Bob said before, they cut off hands without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah.
They would wound people. You have an agricultural society. So if you have your right hand and your left foot cut off,
how can you work?
You can't work. You can't work in the fields. You can't even stand. So the amputees were the modern-day lepers of today because they roamed the streets and all they could do was beg. So the good archbishop over there found St. Stephen, our first martyr, St. Stephen's Home for Amputees, where they have bonded together. We were just over in Sierra Leone, and when our van pulled up to St. Stephen's Home, we were met there by an amputee band. And what a wonderful thing to see two men with drums joined together, arm in arm, one using one hand and one using the other hand he had so they can play the set of drums.
Amazing.
It's just amazing.
You know, one of the other things that I know about, I don't know much about Sierra Leone, but it also has the highest rate of infant mortality. How are you addressing that, Bob?
Oh, we've taken under our care the Sarabu Hospital, which going back to the 50s and the 60s was one of the jewels of Africa. Sarabu Hospital serviced people such as Idi Amin, not a very nice guy, but to give you an idea of the caliber, dictators or heads of state would fly to Sierra Leone to seek medical treatment at Sarabu. It was founded by the Holy Ghost Sisters. It started out as a small maternity clinic in the 1800s and just continued to organically grow to service the needs of the population in Sarabu, which is about 60 miles outside of Freetown. That hospital is primarily a maternity hospital still, although during the Civil War the rebels absolutely bombed it out. The European Union came in after the Civil War and rebuilt the structure, but they didn't put any electricity in. They didn't stock it with anything. They just rebuilt the structure. So we came in and attempted to assist Sarabu by seeking out some funds. We were blessed enough to garner the assistance of Senator Sam Brownback, who's now Governor Sam Brownback of Kansas, who helped us get some grant money from the federal government, and we've partnered with them and gone in and shipped probably well over, I would say, $17 million in value of goods. And Sarabu is now, I would say, fully operational for that part of the world, certainly. And we're attempting to address both infant mortality, but also the mortality of children under 5. In Sierra Leone, they do not celebrate your 1st through 4th birthday. They celebrate your 5th birthday. And the reason for that is because if you make it to 5, statistically your chances of then going on to adulthood are very good. 50% of children don't make it to 5.
Yep.
50%.
That's, you know, can you imagine losing half of your children?
That's right. That's right.
You know, this is just heartbreaking.
And the majority of them die from simple diarrhea.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, because the water is so polluted there.
Yep.
That, you know, diarrhea to me is a nuisance disease. I can go to any drugstore and it's over with 1, 2, 3.
Right.
When you have 5 out of 10 babies dying within the first year from diarrhea, the cry has to come up from the soil.
Yep. 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 So this, you know, y'all are doing a documentary as well.
Yes.
And it's called Rising from the Ashes, about that situation. And here at EWTN, we are going to show it in its entirety at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. But I want to give you a little short clip from that documentary and let you see a little bit of that. That explains more about Sierra Leone.
Sierra Leone, a nation on the west coast of Africa, suffered a horrific and evil civil war from 1991 until 2004. The war left the nation in ruin, and to this day people remain in dire need of help. With their medical system destroyed by the rebels, the once proud people of Sierra Leone now have the highest infant mortality rate in the world. Monsignor Daniel Sullivan, a Catholic priest and relief worker, has given his life to the needs of the Sierra Leonean people.
Civil war in Sierra Leone ended in 2002. The UN peacekeeping troops left there in 2004. From that point on, the country was totally demolished. The government undertook developing of the roads, the sewers, the electricity, the basic infrastructure. They turned over everything else to the Christian churches to develop all the educational system, all the medical systems throughout Sierra Leone. It is a country that is really waiting to rise from the ashes of war.
Again, this is going to be a documentary called Rising from the Ashes. It airs this Friday, which is October 5th, I believe, and it'll be on EWTN at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So make sure you try to see that. Now, one of the other situations is that Sierra Leone, since the Civil War, has gone from being 9% Catholic to over 30% Catholic today.
Correct.
It's a lot of growth.
Absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about this situation.
You know, Father Mitch, we live in a hero-less society.
Here in America.
Here in America.
Yeah.
You go to Sierra Leone, there are heroes in abundance. I have a great love for my brother priests, as I'm sure you do. We have a wonderful confraternity and bond with each other. My brother priests over there are suffering joyfully. I know that sounds strange, but they're suffering joyfully. During the Civil War, the rebels thought that the rich people hid their riches in the churches. When they found out that they weren't there, they took every chalice, they took every ciborium, every monstrance, every liturgical vessel you could think of. To this day, in 2012, my brother priests over there are saying Mass with a jelly jar because they have no chalices. They have to take, if say the color is green for ordinary time, they scatter their Mass times so that after the one Mass is over, the deacon jumps on a bicycle, and drives 2 miles to bring the one vestment they have so that each church can have a vestment. I was a pastor for a while, and I used to walk into my sacristy, and I could open up the sacristy doors and see chalices that had 50 years of dust on them. Here, our brothers over there are celebrating the holy sacrifice of the Mass with a jelly jar. That, to me, is a secret that has to be broadcast. I see my brother priests over there making $50 a month, which is what they make. But they haven't been paid in a year and a half. Because the poor archbishop has to decide, do I feed the orphans or do I pay my priests? So, of course, we feed the orphans.
Yep.
We feed the orphans. I was at a Mass with the archbishop when I was in Sierra Leone. And I don't know if people down here in Alabama, but I'm sure your worldwide audience knows Stewart's root beer. But the chalice was a Stewart's root beer mug with the archbishop right there. There must have been 300 people there. When it came time for the presentation of the gifts, everybody got up and left. And I thought, well, are they trying to get away before the collection, or what are they doing, right? They all went to their cars and their bikes and their buggies, and they all came back, and every parishioner took part in that offertory procession, some carrying 3 eggs, some carrying a loaf of bread, some carrying 2 heads of lettuce, one carrying a live chicken, which the archbishop handed to me, and I didn't have any idea what to do with it, right? You would have known what to do with it, right?
I've taken care of that kind of thing.
Yes, but the people there were bringing all that food so their priest could eat for 1 week. That, to me, is love in action.
Yep. And a great bond between the clergy and their people, because the people obviously recognize how much the clergy love them, and the clergy can see how much the people love them.
Exactly.
It sounds like it's mutual relationship.
Absolutely. And I was telling you before the whole show about Archbishop Gonda, the former archbishop, who was a great big burly man. We used to call him an absolute tornado. He would come into a room and demand presence. The perfect man to lead our church during this Civil War. He was kidnapped by the rebels, along with 2 Holy Ghost fathers and 2 Holy Rosary sisters. Taken out, they told the Archbishop that unless they received ransom money from the Vatican, they were going to rape and kill the sisters. They were going to kill the priests because they stayed back after they had been expelled. The Archbishop, of course, knew Rome was not going to send any money. We don't deal with terrorists. But he said to them, I'm going to devise a plan. He said, I'm going to give myself over to the rebels. Let them do with me as they see fit. And whatever they do, because they knew he knew they were going to torture him, they would escape then through a window. They took the Archbishop in a back room. They stripped him of all of his clothes from his waist up. They burned him with a lit cigarette 75 times on his front and 150 times on his back. And as he was screaming out, the 4 were able to escape. He then escaped when they went after him. When he got back to the chancery in Freetown, Pope John Paul II, whom you didn't argue with, demanded he come back to Rome. It wasn't safe. His response humbles me to no end, because he told Pope John Paul II, a shepherd doesn't leave his sheep. And he stayed in Sierra Leone and walked the streets and would show these marks all over his body. And he called them his stars, not scars, his stars for Jesus. Would I have the courage to do the same? I don't know.
It's no wonder there's so many conversions there with heroes like that.
Absolutely.
I'm afraid we need to take a little break. We're going to come back in a couple minutes. But we want to get questions from our studio audience as well as you. So please stay with us.
St. Benedict sees patience as a way we really participate in the sufferings of Christ.
1 Minute Monk, Abbot Placid Solari of Belmont Abbey.
Patience is an important virtue in the life of a Benedictine monk. In the Rule of St. Benedict, he asks us to bear each other's infirmities. Not only infirmities that take the form of physical illness, which is easy to understand, but those infirmities that are psychological and spiritual too. St. Benedict also asks us to put up with the weaknesses we all have. Whether it's my abbey or your family, there are many opportunities for patience when living with others in community.
For more information on the Rule of St. Benedict or Belmont Abbey, visit oneminutemonk.com. ONE-minutemonk.com.
What a difference it would make if we bore the weaknesses of others with patience and saw them as invitations to immerse ourselves in the love with which Christ bore his sufferings.
I think it's so easy in this day and age to be swept up in popular culture. There's a certain machismo that as men we're expected to do certain things. We don't need anyone's help. We can do it alone. But the truth is, we all need support. I'm not sure it was one thing that attracted me to the Knights initially. I think it was a number of different things. I'd been raised Catholic, looking for other men who were on that same path and in that same journey. But what I found was that the Knights offered many other things. security for my family, through not only life insurance, but through a belief, a common structure that all brothers in the Knights share, a support for one another and a support for our family. And that's why I chose to become a Knight.
Mike Foss is a Knight of Columbus. Become a Knight. Call 800-307-7811 or visit kofc.org.
Thank you and welcome back. I just wanted to give a little bit of information. I want to mention that the Healy International Relief Foundation, HIRF.net, is a place you can find out more about this work. Also, they have a phone number, 609-267-4104. 609-267-4104. Or again, their website, HIRF.net. And, if, some of you priests are listening in and you know of chalices or vestments and other liturgical items, that and books, because one of the problems is they don't have copies of the new translation of the liturgy. Even used missalettes are really helpful, and you can send those to New Jersey, and they'll put them in a big container and send them over to Sierra Leone. So if you collect all the missalettes at the end of the month or every few months and send it over there, they will use it, because the priests don't even always have liturgical books to go around. So they're happy to take missalettes, at this stage. Also, want to mention we have a wonderful audience. One group is from Cincinnati in northern Kentucky. We have other folks from Texas, Los Angeles, and other parts of the country. And we'd love to have you come and join us as well. If you can, please contact our pilgrimage department. And the phone number for them is 205-271-2966. Or the website is www.ewtn.com. They'll give you information about where you can stay and places to eat. Ever see that movie Fried Green Tomatoes? Yeah. That restaurant's down the street.
Is it really?
From the book.
Really?
Yeah, they wrote the book right here in Arndale. Wow. And, all sorts of other good places. And give you schedules of programs, masses, ways to get up to Hansville and all that. So love to have you come down here and join us. You all ready for some questions?
Absolutely.
All right, let's start off. We have Marianne. Hello, Marianne.
Hi, Father Parker. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you, ma'am. Where are you from?
I'm calling from New York.
Great. The city?
New York City.
Great. And what is your question?
My question is, I'd like to ask your guests, well, first of all, thank you so much for enlightening us all on the atrocities that are happening in Sierra Leone. I had no idea, and it's heartbreaking, and I could just, if you start crying, you'd never stop crying. And I'm curious to ask your guests, how do they manage to keep their faith, their hope, their sanity in seeing these horrible, horrible crimes against humanity and still maintain the joy and the spirit to want to say, you know what, we can do this and we can help and we can really make a difference. And God bless you so much for all you do. There's a special place in heaven for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the
Either
question.
one?
It's a good question.
We'll start off with you, and then let's get your
We'll
reaction.
jump back and forth.
Yeah.
She asked about how we keep our faith, our hope, and our sanity. Let's leave sanity to the last one, right? All right. What changed my life was Proverbs 14:31. which says, if you neglect the poor, you curse the God that made them. But if you serve the poor with kindness, it's an act of worship. I go over to Sierra Leone, I work with these people, I hug them, I kiss them. They give me more than I could ever possibly give them. Sure, I can give them a typewriter, or I can give them a prosthetic hand, or a pair of crutches. But when I see them smile, it humbles me to no end that I'll complain if I get a headache, or I'll complain if I get a splinter in my finger. It shows me the face of God with those that suffer so much beyond our imaginings that they can still smile. They have such a faith in God that I have to be honest and say it sometimes puts my faith to shame. They have a hope, they have a love, they have a desire, they have a quest to bond together that is absolutely awe-inspiring.
Bob, how about you? And you've been over there, I take it?
I have. Father Mitch, I'm a big student of history. I'm a big history fan. And one of the things you see in history is that wars are covered very well in textbooks, major wars. Even Sierra Leone probably has a blurb in some textbooks, and certainly had its time in the Channel during the Civil War. What you don't hear about mostly is what happens after. The stories about what happens after. I just came back from Sierra Leone a month ago. It's an absolutely devastated country. When you see commercials of children in tin huts, that's where they're getting that footage from. How do you keep your sanity and how do you keep your faith? Dan took the words right out of my mouth. The people that you meet over there look forward. For everything that happened to them, here in the United States, after something as horrible as a civil war, what's the first thing we would want to do? The knee-jerk reaction is to find all the people that you can that are responsible on the losing side, throw them up on trial maybe, and have somebody to blame, somebody to point a finger to and say, that is the root of all our problems, now let's get rid of it. But those people, to them it's not about blaming anybody, it's about where they're going, not where they're coming from. My father, God bless his soul, is 83, is a great saying, Christ is with the poor. I don't know in my 29, 30 years I really ever saw the face of God until my first trip to Sierra Leone. And it's certainly a trip I would recommend to anybody who can get out there to any third world country, not just Sierra Leone.
You know, as you talk, I find such a contrast between I mean, I can't stand to watch them for 5 minutes, but there are so-called reality shows, you know, Bridezillas and Sweet 16 and things, where these absolutely narcissistic people have a meltdown because there's a run in their seam. And here, these people have lost hands, feet, their breasts cut off, all this, and they're complaining about, oh, I don't like the way that the hors d'oeuvres taste. I mean, this is absurd in its narcissism. And, you know, these are people who show up, you know, the rest of us, you know, with their faith and their kindness. Let's take a question from our studio audience. Ma'am, where are you from?
I'm from Cincinnati, Father.
And your question?
The question is, as for the people in the community or the villages, when you start teaching about the faith, are they even aware of life after death or any of the basic elements of our faith? For starters.
Absolutely. Good question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. You have to remember that the Catholic presence has been in Sierra Leone since the 1800s. So in doing so...
kind of early 1800s.
Almost the end of the 1700s. So it's amazing. It's an English-speaking country today, and you still hear remnants of a Sierra Leonean walking around speaking English with an Irish accent, right?
That's not my first expectation.
No, it kind of threw me for a loop, too, when I first heard it. But the story of Jesus, the message of Jesus, the whole methodology of our faith, heaven, hell, everything is firmly believed by them. And as you said before, Father, the faith is growing by leaps and bounds. The seminary, which was just built, was built for 150 seminarians. They had to turn away 200 because they didn't have room for them. Seminary filled instantly. So the faith is alive and well. Yes, they believe in heaven. Yes, they believe in an afterlife. And yes, they believe in following the footsteps of Jesus.
You know, I'm just talking off the top of my head, but it might not be a bad idea for some of the American dioceses to welcome these young men. It's tough, but maybe some of the American or other African dioceses to train them to go back into Sierra Leone. And, you know, this would be a great partnership as well.
Absolutely.
You know, to help the church there. Pope John Paul strongly called for that in his exhortation, Pastoris Dabo Vobis, that kind of interaction is a great thing to do.
I had a good fortune of being there when they were ordaining the deacons. And I was amazed because I've been through seminary, you've been through seminary, you've lived in a rectory, I've lived in a rectory. The seminary has no water, no running water.
Unless you run after it and get it yourself.
These young men get up before morning mass and go down to a well a mile away and get a pail of water each and bring it back every single day. They have no electricity. I look at our seminaries here that are almost vacant and think, how long would a seminarian here last with no water and electricity?
Right.
I complain if a thunderstorm knocks out my cable for 20 minutes. These heroes to be are truly living the life that we should all look up to.
Yep. We have another call on the line. Hello, Frank.
Hi, how are you, Father?
Fine, thanks. Where are you from?
I'm from Lebanon, Pennsylvania.
Great. And what's your question?
I've had an opportunity to work with Monsignor Dan over the past and with the Healy Foundation. And the Foundation and Monsignor does absolutely tremendous work because of their efforts of getting involved in work and projects in Tanzania. And the question is, Monsignor, with all that you've done and the great work and the great success that you've had, what can we as lay people do to even do more to this phenomenally growing Catholic population in Africa and reinforce the points you just made that we have so much that we have in the United States? What can we actually do to help you even more?
Either one of you.
Certainly going to the website, we take donations, obviously. Even just making yourself aware of the situation over there and bringing that awareness to others is a big thing. We have a Facebook page as well. But it's not just money, it's things. I mean, we need, as you mentioned, Father Mitch, and as Monsignor Sullivan mentioned, chalices, any kind of liturgical items.
Patens.
Oh, absolutely.
Crew, you name it, they don't have
Albs.
it. Anything. Used black pants
Books.
for the priests. Books for the library. They don't have, if they have 4 hours of electricity and there's no electricity at the seminary, how many of us have spiritual books? I sent over a set from 1997 Encyclopedia Britannica. I don't even know if they make them after that anymore, right? They were so thrilled with that because they had something. They don't have internet to look up things. But let me tell you about the Sisters of the Visitation, 16 nuns in a newly found order that have to have dinner in 4 shifts because they only have 4 dinner plates. How many people have extra dinner plates? you go on the website, you're going to see a list of super, super simple things that all of us have in excess that you send to New Jersey and we will send over to Sierra Leone. Children's toys, children's books, anything like that.
And again, some special things that are more needful there that don't require electricity. A lot of us, I remember helping my mother cook, with one of those hand things to blend, food. They need those because they can't use an electric blender.
That's right.
And manual typewriters, portable or big ones, whatever you got. These are things that we look as old-timey in the past, but they really need.
You have to figure nothing with batteries and nothing that's electrical. Someone gave me 25 of the old, remember the old beaters used to turn?
Yeah, right.
And you make your scrambled eggs like that? It was like gold over there.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden, they could make whatever they wanted to.
Right.
These are things we throw out.
And even if you can't give anything, tell people about this.
And pray. Pray for these folks. Pray for these seminaries.
Because this is a heart-wrenching story. If you're human and you listen to this, you can't help but feel for everybody and what's going on over there. The problem isn't that it's not a heart-wrenching story. The problem is nobody knows about it.
Yep. Take another question from our studio audience. Man, where are you from?
I'm from Cincinnati, but born and raised in New Jersey.
Oh, excellent.
Yes. The Archdiocese in Newark, born and raised. And I want to thank you for sharing that with us. We needed to hear that. It was tough to hear. I think as Americans, we can't relate to it. But we need to understand what's happening in these third world countries to be moved to do something about it. And I would just like to know, how do you cope with this in terms of your prayer life? Because when you come back to the States, we worry about where we're going to park our car when we go to the mall. We worry about the clothing we're going to wear to some party that we wore before. We worry about things that these people couldn't even think about because we're Americans and we're so blessed, abundantly blessed. And we don't realize how blessed we are. And how can we pray for you in particular and for you also? What would be your prayer intentions to keep you strong and to get the word out? And I'd like to know a little bit more about your prayer lives.
Thank you. That thrills my heart to hear that you will remember us in prayer. Yes, indeed, of course, remember the children of Sierra Leone. Remember the priests, the poor archbishop with his hands full of things. The archbishop once said to me that he weeps every night because of the needs that go untended. My prayer life has changed dramatically from the first moment that I started this ministry to now. I find myself doing a lot of prayers of gratitude, of humility, and hope. Prayers of hope to me are what get me through. Every time I leave Sierra Leone, I always say, Lord, if I complain about anything small, hit me with a 2x4. That usually lasts. I haven't complained yet.
I'm not worried about you. It's me. I'm worried about it.
That lasts till the changeover.
2x4s come swinging around and I'm in trouble.
Exactly. And I say, Lord, we complain about the most ridiculous thing, as that good viewer just said. That usually lasts till I'm on the plane and get served the airplane food. And I lose it already. So I think my prayer life is constantly reminding me, not that there are people worse off than me, because they're better people than I am. Not that there are people that have less than me, because these are people that have more in here than I will ever have. So my prayer life has changed in a way to say, make me more like them so that I can always be their voice, their hands, their heart, and their message.
Excellent. Excellent. I have one more question from our studio audience. Ma'am, where are you from?
Fort Thomas, Kentucky.
And your question?
Well, I have a daughter who's 10, and of course the story breaks my heart because it would just kill me if anything like that ever happened to her. But do you have any specific stories of successes with the young girls who've come out of this and been healed?
We have about a minute or so. You have those stories?
Well, I could. There's one that I remember from being at St. Mary's Home. There was a young girl there who I believe she was being trained as a mechanic. Mm-hmm. And when we first came in there, we talked to all of them and had some separate interviews with some of the girls. And this one girl stood up, and she was within a group of the other girls. And she said to me, she said to both of us, "I want you to know that I am not Catholic. I am a Muslim." I said, "Okay." She said, "I was brought up to hate Catholics." This is an odd thing in Sierra Leone. Muslims and Catholics generally get along. There's not a lot of aggravation in that country. Right. And she said, "I was brought up to hate Catholics. I was brought into St. Mary's Home. I cannot imagine hating people of that kind of faith now. I can't imagine the kind of person I was." She's still a Muslim. She hasn't converted. But it's opened her eyes. It's made her a loving person, regardless of her faith. And it's made her able to admit that to a lot of people who I'm sure when she was first found, she wouldn't have. She was a streetwalker. And that to me is a success story in and of itself because it shows the growth of character.
Sure.
It shows that it's working.
Yeah. Well, I just want to again give Healy International Relief Foundation, and that is HIRF.net. And their phone number is 609-267-4104. If you have old auto mechanics tools and carpentry tools,
absolutely,
and anything like that at all that you don't need anymore, hand saws and things like that, get them out there. They'd love it. Whether it's metric or English style, either one.
Doesn't matter.
All right. Father, would you join me in giving a blessing?
Absolutely.
May Almighty God bless you and keep you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
And again, we want to remind you that we can bring you guests like these and all the other guests and do the other programs because you bring this network to you. So we ask that you do keep us in between your gas bill, electric bill, and your cable bill, and we will be able to pay off all of our bills too. Thank you, and God bless.